right, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Mike, for that introduction. I appreciate it. And thank you all for coming out and learning a little bit more about personal finance, financial topics. Money is a complex topic that's chock full of emotions, dreams, hardship, and everything in between. I've helped hundreds of families and individuals make sense of money. And I found that once you learn more about money and how to manage it, you begin to treat it more for what it's worth, which it's a tool that'll help you accomplish your goals and dreams. Yes, emotions and tough decisions will always be associated with money. However, the more you learn about personal finance, the easier these decisions will become and the less anxiety you will have around money. Today, I'm going to give you a comprehensive overview of strategies for growing and protecting your assets so you can have more confidence when making tough financial decisions and better align your money with your goals. When I was initially planning this presentation, I was brainstorming what resembles growing and protecting your assets, and it hit me. I think going on a road trip ties in nicely with this concept, makes it a little bit more memorable. So I'll be touching on that as we go through this presentation. Now, when you get started on a road trip, the first thing that you have to do is figure out where you want to go. This is the same for growing and protecting your assets. You must decide what you want to accomplish and make a plan to achieve those goals. So without goals, your asset growing journey doesn't have a lot of meaning. The meaning behind why you want to grow your assets will keep you motivated and diligent in your pursuit to accomplish your goals. Okay, so today we're going to be going through saving a couple of strategies for growing your assets, also for preserving the assets that you're growing. And then we're going to cover a couple of estate planning topics and ways that you can manage your estate or your assets while you're living. Okay, so I first want to start off with what is an asset? An asset is simply anything that you own. Now, with that being said, there's different categories of assets. There's financial assets, which is anything in a bank account or anything in an investment account. These assets tend to be easily valued, and you can easily mobilize the dollars within these accounts to pay for any future goals or any unexpected expenses that come up. Now, the other category of assets are real assets. So anything that's tangible, anything that your house, your car, anything like that. Just know that these assets are harder to value, and they're a little bit more difficult to mobilize and use for your goals. Okay. So you've determined where you want to go on this road trip, and now you need to come up with a packing list. You need to figure out what you need in order to accomplish everything that you want to do on that trip. This ties in really nicely with growing your assets. So you need to figure out where you're at today and the most efficient and effective way to proceed towards accomplishing your goals. So a lot of people, when I talk to them about, what's the most efficient way for you to grow your assets? A lot of people say, well, increasing your income and maximizing your rate of return in your investments is the best way to grow your assets. And I think these are two very important pieces of the puzzle. However, I would argue the most important thing or the first step in growing your assets is making sure that you refine your savings. Saving is so important for many reasons that I'll cover in just a little bit, but it's really important. A couple of things to note about saving. I typically, see a minimum of 15 to 20% savings towards long-term goals like retirement or other expenses way off in the future is a really good minimum number for savings. Now, this is only the amount that you contribute to these accounts. It's not the employer provided benefit as well. So TRS, roughly 6% is going into the account. You have some 9% to hit that minimum target there. So that's kind of how that works, how I conceptualize it. Now, for savings, a lot of people, they think of saving as just setting aside money in a pot for the future, for when you no longer want to work and you want to pay for things in the future. I would argue that it's even more powerful than that. Because when you save more today, that means that your standard of living, the amount of money that it takes for you to live, actually goes down as well. And most people in retirement, their number one goal is to maintain their standard of living for the future when they no longer want to work. Well, if you save more, you're going to spend less today, which means that you're going to need less tomorrow. So savings, it really accomplishes two goals that are really important, and it's one reason why it's so important. Now, a couple of strategies. So I mentioned 15 to 20%. You want to make sure that your savings rate is a percentage. It will help you in having a more dynamic policy around how much you will save. If you make more money, from a percentage standpoint, you're going to save more money. If you make less money in a given year, you're going to end up saving a little bit less money due to that. So having percentages associated with your savings plan is so important. Now, let's say you're struggling to meet this 15 to 20% savings. When I work with people, one great strategy that I always implement is, or I recommend, is, you have all your money from your paycheck go into one account. Why don't you go ahead and open up a separate account and start earmarking some savings towards that? Starting off with baby steps, maybe 1 or 2% of your income, and then increasing it every 6 months. That's a really good way for you to get to that minimum 15 to 20% savings target. Okay, so we have covered, you try and save 15 to 20%, but now where do I save the 15 to 20%? So I have a policy-driven savings waterfall illustration up here. So the way that this works is the rain, which is symbolic of income, is going to fall and it's going to begin filling up buckets of the waterfall, starting at the top and working its way down. So starting at the top, we have Teachers Retirement System Plan, which is that mandatory 6%. The reason why it's at the top is because you have to pay into it. Now, with that being said, you save for that. The remainder of your savings should be directed to various other buckets. The first bucket that you should consider saving to is an emergency fund. Emergency fund is an account that it helps pay for any unexpected catastrophic expenses that may arise. The concept behind an emergency fund is you want to save between 3 and 6 months worth of expenses. If you're in a single household, you'll want to save 6 months of expenses. If you're in a joint income household, you're going to want to save 3 months of expenses. Now, with all that being said, and with many of the things that I'm going to go over today, this is not a hard and fast rule, just some guidance. I've worked with people where they needed 1 year's of expenses saved up in order for them to sleep at night. So it's different for everybody. It's mostly important for your circumstance and what you feel most comfortable. But for the most part, the rule for this is between 3 and 6 months of expenses if you need guidance around that. Okay, so the next two buckets are going to be your retirement savings. I prioritize the employer retirement plan next, which is your 457B, your 403B, or your 401k. This bucket allows you to contribute $23,000 a year or $30,500 if you are above the age of 50. And these numbers change every year, every other year. Just know that if you're trying to learn more about the contribution limits, you'll need to research that to find that information outside of this year. Now, these accounts are really great. They allow you to save tax advantage dollars to an account, so it's going to benefit you some way in taxes. We're going to cover that in the next slide. And it's quite a bit of money too. The differences between all of these accounts, so the 403B and the 401k, the distribution rules, that's where they differ. So the 403B and the 401k, you have to separate from service and you have to be above the age of 55 in order to take money out of this account penalty free. There's a 10% penalty if you do take money from this account before those two items are met. Now, 457B is really, it differs from these other two accounts because there is no age restriction associated with this account. So if you're planning on retiring early or things like that, you'll want to consider, at least know about the 457B, and distributions from this account are just, you just have to separate from service. There isn't that age restriction. Now, the next bucket that we're going to cover is the individual retirement arrangement account, or the IRA account. This one it's not an employer provided account. It is an individual account that you'll have to establish and begin funding and investing. But this account allows you to put away $7,000 or $8,000 if you're above the age of 50. And one thing that's different about this account is you can manage the investments you can access any of the investments that are provided to you through that bank, where with your employer retirement plans, typically there's options that you have to choose from. A couple of other things about IRAs, there's traditional IRAs and there's Roth IRAs. So when distributing money from these accounts, just know that you have to be older than 59 and a half in order to avoid the 10% penalty. Now, with your Roth IRA, just know that the money that you put into that account, you can take out tax and penalty free. Now, I only say that you're going to have an emergency fund that pays for any unexpected expenses, and you shouldn't need any Roth IRA money until you are getting closer to your long-term goals. The money in this account, growing tax-free, is so valuable that you want to avoid at all costs taking any money from your Roth IRA. Just want everybody to know more about it. Okay. So the 15 to 20%, it's been filling up all of your buckets. You now want to save more for additional opportunities. Maybe some short-term goals instead of retirement in 10, 20, 30 years. Maybe you have some short-term goals. You want to buy a bigger house. You want to pay for your kids' education. You want to go on more vacations. The opportunity fund at the bottom of the waterfall is the catch-all for that. It's the lowest priority savings bucket. However, this is where you can save towards those goals that are maybe more short term. Now, the emergency fund and the opportunity fund, these aren't specific accounts. These are just more ideas, concepts. If you do want a place to save money for these accounts, it'll be a high yield savings account. A lot of people, they have savings account at Ally or at Bank of America, Wells Fargo. They don't provide a lot of interest in those accounts. You'll want to do additional due diligence to research some high yield savings accounts that would be better for the money that you're putting on the sidelines in order for your emergency fund or your opportunity fund. So one quick scenario as we go through this, let's say an emergency pops up and you've been saving to all your buckets and you needed to deplete your emergency fund completely. At that point in time, you would stop saving to all the buckets that are below the emergency fund, and you would replenish your emergency fund before saving to the other buckets. So that's kind of how this works dynamically. The other thing is you may have some unexpected income along the way. I like to use the example, let's say you have a rusty car in your driveway, you've been meaning to sell it on a Facebook Marketplace, but you didn't want to have to deal with all that. And your neighbor comes out of nowhere and says, I'll pay you $10,000 for that car. What do you say? And you say, yes, I've been meaning to sell it for a year and a half now. And then you get $10,000. The way that this would work, you see the 10% fund on the top left of this illustration. You would earmark 10% of this windfall towards going on a vacation. Maybe buying something that you didn't really want to purchase, but now you have some additional resources, so you want to go ahead and do that. The other 90% is going to be earmarked towards the savings waterfall, though. It's going to cascade through all of your buckets. It's going to have an assigned goal for each dollar for each of these accounts. This is a way for you to have a good understanding of where you should save in any situation. Okay, the last thing that we're going to cover for growing your assets is tax planning. So the most popular question about tax planning is, when should I pay taxes on the money that I contribute to my retirement accounts? So this is the pre-tax versus Roth savings question. So the way that pre-tax savings works is the money that goes into your accounts. It could be your 401k, your 403b, your 457b, or your traditional IRA. Any of the money that goes in pre-tax to these accounts is not factored into your tax equation for that year. So if you make $100,000, you save $5,000 to a pre-taxed account, you're only going to be taxed on $95,000 from an income tax perspective. Now, once the money's in this account, it's going to grow tax deferred, and then when you go to take money out of the account, it'll be taxed at that point in time. So for a Roth savings, when you put money into the account, you don't experience any tax savings at that point in time. That comes later. So money goes in, it grows tax-free, and then when you pull money out of the account, it'll be tax-free. So this is really important. It's good to have a good mix of both, but the question is, when should I do one versus the other? So for Roth savings, if you're earlier in your career and you're not making as much, it's more beneficial to go ahead and not take advantage of that savings by putting money into the account, but going ahead and paying taxes, putting the money into the account, letting it grow tax-free. And then when you pull it out, it'll be tax-free when you're paying for your long-term goals. So for your pre-taxed account, when you're later on in your career and you're at your peak income years, when you make more money, you're going to be paying a larger portion in taxes based on your salary. So with that, you want to maximize the tax savings when you're making more money and you're closer to retirement. So you may want to consider contributing to the pre-tax side of your accounts. So in summary, if you're younger, if you're not making as much, the Roth savings make a lot of sense. If you're later on in your career and you're getting closer to retirement, pre-tax savings makes a lot of sense. Okay, now we're going to transition into preserving your assets. So you've done such a good job with growing your assets. Now we need to make sure that you preserve them or protect them in the case that something unexpected happens. I like to tie this when I think about a road trip. This is an imaginary story, but if you're traveling along and you're hundreds of miles away from a mechanic shop, you're hundreds of miles away from your house, and you get a spare tire, what do? You pull over, you go ahead and get the spare tire and you replace it. You keep traveling, you go to the nearest town and you get your tire fixed. You're annoyed and you take up a little bit of time, but you're still able to accomplish everything you wanted in that road trip. Well, let's say that you didn't have a spare tire. Well, now you got to call the tow truck driver. You have to wait for the tow truck driver, and you have to hope that the mechanic's going to be open on the weekend for you to fix your tire. A lot of time, a lot of money is taken away from your trip. So much so that you may not be able to accomplish everything that you wanted to do, or you have to turn around. You don't have enough money budgeted for all of these expenses. So this ties in nicely with protecting your assets. You want to make sure that you're working so hard to grow this nest egg that you have for the future. You would hate for something to come up to completely deter you from what you want to accomplish. So we're going to go through a couple of strategies to make sure that you maintain that trajectory of where you want to go, but also that if anything unexpected were to happen, you're still able to accomplish your goals. First thing we're going to cover isn't going to be insurance. It's going to be things that you can do now to make sure that you keep that trajectory towards savings for your future goals. I think all of us have had unexpected expenses come up, and man, they're a huge headache. A lot of stress comes with that. One way to mitigate this is having an emergency fund. What we mentioned a few slides back, you want to make sure that you have 3 to 6 months of expenses in case something unexpected happens or something catastrophic happens. If you get laid off or lose your job, you want to make sure you have some money set aside to help you during that gap. You don't want to rush into something else. You want to take your time and find the next chapter for you. And the emergency fund helps alleviate stress so you can better focus on that. Unexpected expenses. You get into a big car accident, or if you have a large medical bill that comes up, the last thing that you want is to have to pull money from your retirement accounts or for the buckets that are earmarked for your future goals. You'd rather pull from an emergency fund. Now, also, there are some benefits of having an emergency fund that's going to increase the amount that you can save each year. So if you have an emergency fund, all of the insurance that you have has a form of a deductible for the most part. And a deductible is the amount that you have to pay for your insurance before your insurance provider will pay you a benefit. Well, if you have an emergency fund, you can increase the deductibles on all of your insurance, and that will essentially reduce the premiums that you have to pay, increasing the savings that you ultimately will have. So just the strategy there, conceptually thinking about the emergency fund and how it can benefit you. I'm also going to touch on the emergency fund once we get to the long-term disability slide in a couple. So we'll go through that. Now, I mentioned before an opportunity fund. If you're saving for something that's 10 years out, you may want to invest the money that's earmarked for this goal. Now, if you do that, the rule Guidance that I like to share with people is when you come within 2 years of that purchase, you need to go ahead and sell your investments and hold it in the high yield savings account. The reason being is you don't want the market, the investment market or bond market, to reduce in value, affecting your ability to accomplish that goal. For example, purchasing a car. These two items are really great for making sure that you don't pull money from future goals, but also so you don't have to take on debt. So just know that for cash reserves, if you come within 2 years of a big expense, you just want to make sure that you have the cash set aside for that. Okay, so now we're going to go through insurance. So these are different insurance policies that all of you should be aware of. Most of us in here need a lot of these policies. So disability, life insurance, umbrella insurance, we'll go through that. We'll also go through long-term care insurance and exactly where that fits into your asset growing and protecting journey. Okay. So for long-term disability, the way this insurance works is if you were to ever become disabled and unable to work and make money, this policy would pay out 60 to 70% of your income so you can continue to live and pay for medical bills and things like that, even though you're not working. The reason why this is one of the most important insurance policies that we're going to cover today is 25% of every working adult will become disabled. And of those adults that become disabled, they're out of work for 36 months on average. So that is a risk that most people cannot cover themselves, so they need that insurance policy. Now, I will say with long-term disability, this insurance, most of the time, you'll have to definitely do a little bit of homework for this. Most of the time, your employer provides a really great policy. So if you're interested in getting a policy and you don't have it now, when you have your open window for benefits, you'll want to look into that and see if you can add that to add that benefit. Now, one thing to know, I mentioned emergency fund ties in with long-term disability. There's an elimination period with long-term disability that you should be aware of. Essentially what that means is when you become disabled, you will have to pay for your own expenses for a certain amount of time before the policy will actually pay out to you. And the emergency fund fits nicely into that need, bridging the gap so you can go ahead and just have a long-term disability policy, and then you pull money from your emergency fund as you wait to receive the benefit from the insurance company. Now, if you don't have a properly funded emergency fund, you'll want to look into short-term disability, and that essentially will bridge the gap in that scenario. So, as you shop around for long-term disability policies or you're looking at the policy handbook, there are some terms and definitions that you should at least just be aware of. What we're going to cover now is various different policies and when they're going to pay out if you become disabled. Own occupation is the best. If you become disabled and you can't do your job, own occupation is the most flexible with paying out benefits. Any occupation is more restrictive. So if you were to lose your job, but you could do something comparable, make a similar amount of money, it's likely not to pay a benefit out to you. Hybrid policy, it's a way that some insurance companies, they juggle both. They allow own occupation, which was really, really good for maybe 3 years. And then they ratchet it down to any occupation. At that point in time, you have to be severely disabled in order to maintain benefits from the insurance policy. And then partial disability, let's say that you were a surgeon, you hurt your hand, couldn't perform surgeries anymore. You decided that you were just gonna go work the gift shop down at the ground floor of the hospital, not making too much, but making something. The insurance policy is going to factor in that you were making X amount. We need to make sure that you receive 60 to 70% of that. However, we know that you're making some money, so we're gonna factor that into the benefits that we pay out to you. So just know all of these terms and definitions as you look more into long-term disability policies. Next thing that we're going to cover is life insurance. Life insurance is also really, really important, especially if you have goals that you want to meet, regardless if you pass away unexpectedly or if you have people that depend on you financially. Life insurance should be a factor in your asset preserving thought process. A couple of things to note about insurance is you want to make sure that you are accounting for all of the liability or debt that you have. One goal that you may have is you want to pay off this debt if you were to pass away so your surviving spouse or surviving family members don't have to deal with it once you pass away. Other things to factor in, some of those opportunity fund goals. You may want to fund those even if you are no longer here. So if you're saving, if you have a goal to save for your kids' education, it may be an item that you want to include in your life insurance equation. Okay, I view insurance where there's really there's multiple different types of insurance, but I break them out as term life insurance or permanent life insurance. Term life insurance covers you for a specific amount of time. If you pass away within that term, you receive the death benefit. If you live past that term, you're no longer covered. Now, because you're only covered for a specific amount of time, these term policies, life insurance policies, are actually a lot lower cost than their alternative, the permanent life insurance. Now, permanent life insurance is more expensive, but you're covered for the rest of your life. So if you have goals where regardless of what happens in retirement, if something catastrophic happens and I use up all of my money, I want to make sure my beneficiaries have something, this would be a good reason to look into permanent life insurance. Now, for the most part, most of the people I work with, term life insurance does the job. It bridges the gap for the risk associated with their loved ones being taken care of if they were to pass away. The reason being is if you're growing your assets, your ability to protect your loved ones grows as you have more money, as you have more resources. So your need for a lot of people for life insurance goes down as you get closer to accomplishing your goals. But like I said, permanent life insurance certainly has its place. It's just a little bit fewer and far between for it being needed. Okay, the next thing we're going to cover is umbrella insurance. This one is so important as well. All of these are important, but this one I've actually worked with somebody directly impacted by it, and it haunts me to this day, just with their situation. I had a colleague who was working with somebody who refused to get umbrella insurance. Successful farmer, had a lot of assets. They also had a lot of retirement savings too, which is an asset, but they were diversified. They were going to be living in retirement very well. And their goal was to transition the farm over to their kids. He had it all figured out, but he refused to get umbrella insurance. Farmer was driving home one night, wasn't looking, paying attention, veered into the oncoming traffic, hit a car head on, killed a girl in the back seat of the oncoming car. He was sued, and he lost almost all of his assets in that process. He had such a bright future, retirement goals that were going to be met. Unfortunately, because of that, and because he didn't have umbrella insurance to help protect him, he lost almost everything, and he had to really ratchet down his goals in retirement. So something, just to be looking at. Your property and casualty insurance provider or an insurance broker can help you with obtaining an umbrella insurance policy. Really important for you to at least know about this. Now, this umbrella insurance policy, the way that it works is it's actually it's liability insurance on top of your automobile, homeowners, or renters insurance policy. So your underlying property and casualty insurance, they have liability protection. This just enhances it. Okay, the last insurance item that we're going to cover is long-term care. This one is a little bit more complex insurance a product. Certainly, if you're interested in it, highly recommend reaching out to a professional. And a long-term care insurance broker, those do exist. They do a phenomenal job with brokering out or shopping for these policies for you, and then also providing you with the policies that are most cost-effective, and also they're going to accomplish the risks that you want to mitigate. Now, what is long-term care insurance? So what this does is if you're unable to take care of yourself, you're going to need other people to help take care of you, whether you go to a nursing home or whether you hire people to come to your house and help take care of you. This policy will pay out a benefit to help supplement this additional care. So when I talk with people about who are deciding whether or not they should look into a long-term care insurance policy, I tell them, okay, in retirement, or even now, if you were to need to go to a nursing home facility, that is roughly $84,000 a year. On average, a person receives long-term care for 3 years. That's $250,000 that If you can write a check, or if you're not uncomfortable to do that, you may be able to self-insure. Now, if you're uncomfortable with that thought process, you may want to look into this insurance policy and at least determine what a plan would be if you are going to self-insure to pay for these costs. Getting into more of the specifics about a long-term care policy, these policies provide a benefit, weekly or daily, weekly benefit for a certain amount of time. These benefits can also adjust with inflation. Just know the longer you can receive these benefits, the larger the maximum benefit, and the cost of living adjustment, or the increase of your benefit over time, is going to make this policy more expensive. This is a very expensive insurance. So this is something that a lot of planning is going to have to go into if you do need it. When people ask me, when should I look into long-term care insurance? If you're concerned about it, you should look into it today. That's all I mean, really, you don't have to commit to a policy. Now, I will say this, if you're trying, some of the best time to get a long-term care insurance policy when you're looking at the premiums, the amount of money that you are going to be putting into this policy and not into your savings. The sweet spot is between 58 to 62. That's roughly the time where I've seen a lot of people, they take advantage of the fact that they're younger and they're able to get a policy at a more cost-effective level, but they're not going to be paying into this policy for an extended amount of time or for more than they really have to. Now, as you age, the premiums for these policies will go up. So that's why trying to look into this in your earlier 60s is really beneficial. All right, so now we're transitioning into distributing your assets. So you've had a successful road trip, you had your tire blew out, you got it changed, you had the spare tire. You're able to accomplish everything that you wanted to on this trip. Now, along the way, and also at your final destination, you're probably going to be picking up a few souvenirs for your loved ones back home. Well, the souvenirs tie in really nicely with estate planning or distributing assets, coming up with a plan to make sure that your loved ones are taken care of. Notice that I said along the way. So estate planning is not earmarked for when you're later on in life and you have a lot more resources and assets. You should be thinking about estate planning now, today. Considering it, figuring out the plan. We're going to be going through all the things that you need to be aware of when building an estate plan to make sure that all of your wishes are coming true. Now, I like to tell people estate planning is an act of love. Nobody likes to do it, but it's going to be active, whether it be tomorrow or 20 years from now or 30 or 40 years from now. You will use your estate plan, so having it in place today will benefit not only you and your peace, your sense of peace, but also if you were to pass away unexpectedly, your loved ones are going to be able to focus on celebrating your life and mourning your death and not having to worry who's going to receive what of the assets. I've worked with a lot of people where not having an estate plan tears apart families, and it's really sad to see that. And by having an estate plan in place, it helps you ensure that your family can come together during that time and not be divisive. Okay, why do people not have an estate plan? Well, it's an icky topic to go through. Nobody wants to think about when they pass away. But it's so important to conceptualize it and come up with a plan. Other reasons, procrastination. I'll do it next year. I don't need to do it now. I don't have enough money. Or, I'm not old enough for this to even really make sense. Well, like I said before, the best time to start looking at your estate plan and putting it in place is today, in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so let's say you don't have a proper estate plan in place and some of your assets don't have instructions for where they are going to go to or who they are going to go to if you pass away. If that's the case, then those assets will be passed along via intestacy laws. Georgia has a set of laws that will determine exactly where the money or where the assets will go to if you pass away. The way intestacy laws work is if you pass away and you have a spouse, 100% of your assets that go through intestacy laws will go to your spouse. If you have a spouse and kids, your assets will split up equally between all of the living family members, your spouse and all of your kids. Now, with all that being said, a minimum of 33% will be going to your spouse, and then the rest would be divvied up to your kids. A lot of people don't know about this, and once they learn about this provides some motivation to go ahead and get an estate plan in place to make sure that intestacy laws don't govern your distributions. Now, if let's say you don't have a spouse, but you have kids, all of your assets in your estate will then transition to your kids equally. So now, if you don't have a spouse or kids, then it'll go to your grandchildren. If you don't have grandchildren, it'll go to your parents. Parents aren't living, it'll go to your siblings, and so on and so forth. So just know the importance of having an estate plan. If you don't add instructions for how you want your estate to be distributed, the state of Georgia has laws to do that. And a lot of the times it doesn't align with what a lot of people have in mind for their estate distributions. Okay, so what are the documents that you need to make sure that you have instructions tied to every single asset that you own? Well, we're going to cover wills, property titling, beneficiary designation, trust, gifts, all of these items for managing distributions from your estate. These are so very important. Highly recommend reaching out to an estate planning attorney to either have them review your documents, or if you need to get them drafted, they are the best resource to do that. They're going to make sure that all of your assets are being accounted for, and they're going to talk through with you how this distribution is going to work and enlighten you to maybe different vehicles that you weren't aware of on how to distribute these assets to your loved ones. First thing, we're going to start off with the bedrock of the estate plan, the will. So this is a legal document where you, the will maker, will establish who is going to act in your best interest, the executor, who's going to manage the estate when you pass away. It's also going to include instructions on how assets will be distributed, where are they going to go to. Lastly, this is where you would appoint a guardian for your minor children if you have minor children. This is the document that you would be able to do that. And the last will and testament, if you reach out to an estate planning attorney and they help you draft this document, it's a higher likelihood that you won't have any of your assets transition through intestacy laws. Legal requirements for the will. So you have to be at least age 14. You have to be of sound, sufficient mind and memory. You have to write out your will, and the kicker, this is the most important part in my opinion, you have to sign the will. You also have to have 2 witnesses that will not receive any benefit from your will to sign it as well. So a lot of people, they do bullet 1, 2, and 3, and then they mess up on bullet 4. You don't have a valid will at that point in time. Like I mentioned though, using an estate planning attorney is really great to make sure that this document is active and it aligns with Georgia laws. One thing to note about wills is anything that transitions to your loved ones via a will is going to go through probate. And probate is a legal process that appoints the executor, it validates the will, makes your will public, and then also changes the titling of your assets from your estate to your loved ones. So most people in the state of Georgia, they have a last will and testament. They have a will, and that's sufficient for all of their needs. Very simple. You have, I want these things to go to this person, these things to go perhaps to this entity. We have all of that mapped out, and that's all we need. But just know that probate process, or Georgia probate, is easier and more cost effective compared to most other states. So that's another reason why a lot of people in Georgia, they only have a will in their estate planning documentation. So now, things to be aware of here is when you pass away and your assets go through probate, everything is made public. So I can go up to the courthouse, the probate court, and I can go to this room in the back, and there's files for as far as you can see with all of the last wills and testaments for the people who have passed away in that county. So no, it's public. Also, because it's public, the reason why they make it public is so people can contest it if they find that they have a vested interest in your estate plan and you did not list it in your last will and testament. There is a legal process for contesting the will. Last thing to note, it takes a little bit of time to get through the probate process. On average, it takes between 12 and 18 months to get through the probate process. Quite a bit of time. So you may want to diversify the assets that distribute via probate and the assets that distribute outside of probate. We'll cover more of those strategies shortly. Okay, next thing we're going to cover is property titling. Most people, this is for businesses or for your home or your personal property. So if you own something outright, you're going to own it fee simple. And essentially what that means, if you pass away, your executor is going to look at your will and they're going to distribute that property to the person listed in your will. Tenants in common, that's for if you own something, a portion of it, and you have other owners associated with that asset, your ownership will be distributed according to your last will and testament. And then typically in a will, you have a section that goes over how personal property will be distributed. So that's also dictated by your will. Now, let's say you didn't want this property to go through probate. For an example, you're just nervous that it going through the probate court or that process being 12 to 18 months, that's too long if you were to pass away. You could title this asset joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. And essentially what this means is your ownership of that asset will transition over to the other owner of the property. Okay. So beneficiary designations, this is probably the second popular or probably the most popular way for you to distribute assets outside of probate. So for all of your financial accounts, even your bank account, you have an ability to establish beneficiaries on these accounts. And the way that this works is if you pass away, your assets will transition to the beneficiary listed within that account outside of probate. The process will go as quickly as your beneficiary and your bank can work together to get the paperwork filled out and also to provide them with the banks with the death certificate. So with that being said, these are really important because you need to keep track of them. Just like every other aspect of your estate plan, you need to check on everything every other year. I've worked with people in the past where they went through a divorce, they were remarried, had children in their new marriage, and we took a look at their beneficiaries, and guess who was listed as the beneficiary on all of their accounts? It was the ex-spouse. Can you imagine if that person had passed away and all of their assets went to the ex-spouse and their kids and the surviving spouse couldn't receive any benefit from that? So if anything from this presentation, first thing, you can do this today for most of your accounts. Just go and take a look at your beneficiary designations, make sure everything looks good there. If you want to change your beneficiary designations or if you want to add beneficiary designations to any of your financial accounts, you just reach out to the bank, request the paperwork, fill the paperwork out, and then send it back to them. They will update their instructions on file at that point in time. Okay, so revocable living trust. So this is a really important concept. It works a lot like a will. A revocable living trust, it's essentially a document that you draft. It's a legal document. And this trust establishes a trustee, which is likely going to be you or your spouse. And then a successor trustee is somebody who takes over the trust once you pass away to help continue to manage it. You also establish distribution rules with the trust, but it's different than the last will and testament, or it can be. The last will and testament, the will, that only allows you to provide information on who receives your assets. That's it. Once you pass away, it goes through the probate process, the estate's closed out, everybody has their assets, you move on past that point regarding estate planning. Revocable living trust allows you to maintain control over your assets after you pass away. So if you were to pass away, your successor trustee would step in, begin managing the trust assets, and then they would be distributing those assets to your loved ones according to your trust. The most popular reason why revocable living trusts are needed or why people look into them is if you have minor children. If you have minor children and you were to pass away and you had last will and testament, the assets would transition into the name of your kids, and then their guardian would have to, with the court supervision, would have to manage those assets. And then when your kids turn 18 or graduate college, then they will take over. They will have full access to these accounts. They can spend it, all of it, down the next day. With a trust, on the other hand, though, you can establish decision rules on when your beneficiaries can receive distributions. So you can hold it in trust until your kids obtain the age of 25 or until they get to 35 years of age. You can do that in a way that, okay, so when my child turns 25, I want them to have 25% of the trust assets. And then when they turn 35, give them 50%. And then when they're 45, they can receive the remaining trust assets at that point in time. So you can provide a little bit more color to your estate plan through a revocable living trust. So once you pass away, just a really quick note, revocable, what that means is you can make changes while you're living, but once you pass away, the trust terms are set in stone, and your trustee will have to manage the trust according to how your most recent update. So just know there's a lot of other reasons why you would want a revocable living trust. Remember, in the state of Georgia, a revocable living trust isn't necessary for a lot of people. It adds a lot of complexity, and it does cost more. The upfront costs, but also the costs associated with having an active trust for a decade or two is going to add up as well. So just know that this option is out there, and if it certainly has its place. But yeah, just to go over the balance between will and a revocable living trust. Okay, so now we're going to cover estate tax. So this estate tax, the reason why I've included it in this presentation, I've talked to a lot of people and they're like, yeah, I need to do I need to plan, or I need to do some estate planning because I don't want to pay taxes when I die. Well, I immediately sit back in my chair and I was like, well, you must have more than $13.61 million to even worry about that. So I'm just wildly impressed. Most of the time, people don't realize that there is an estate tax lifetime exclusion. If you pass away and your assets are below $13.61 million, you don't have to worry about estate tax. So if you ever are wondering why you should or should not do estate planning, just know if you have under $13.61 million, estate tax really shouldn't be a huge factor in why you're doing that. There's more important reasons to do that. So just know it actually doubles if you're married. So it even increases even more. Of the people who passed away in 2020, less than 0.5% actually paid estate taxes. So just to give you more insight into the very small amount of people that actually are affected by this. Okay, now we're going to cover making gifts during your life. So if you make a gift to someone and you don't receive any value in return, you have just made a gift. So gifts can be cash, security, investments, real estate, vehicles, art. What doesn't count as a gift is going to be any gifts or any money given to a college or educational institution or medical facility to pay for somebody else's care or education. If you pay it directly to the institution, it's not a gift. Gifts to a spouse, yep, that isn't a gift either. You're just transferring money back and forth. And then, oddly enough, gifts and donations to a political organization don't count as a gift either. Okay, so you know what a gift is. How does that factor in from a tax standpoint? Well, the one thing I want to drive home is when you make a gift, neither party is subjected to income tax. So if you give someone $15,000, they receive it, you don't have to do anything with your 1040 or income tax, and they don't have to really do anything with their income tax for that transaction. Now, there is gift tax. Most of us in here don't really have to worry about paying gift tax, but you need to know that you have to report any gifts that are made over the annual exclusion. So for this year, you have $18,000 that you can give to any person, and you don't have to report. You can give multiple people $18,000. That number is doubled if you're married, but just know if you ever do want to double that exclusion because you and your spouse want to make a gift together, you do have to report it. And the way that you report this is through your Form 709 with the IRS. Okay, so how does this all tie in? So if you make a gift that's above $18,000, just know that the excess amount that you give, you're going to have to report it. And that amount is going to eat away for your lifetime exclusion for your gift tax. And it mirrors your estate lifetime exclusion of 13,610,000. So don't have to worry about paying the tax, but you do need to report it. Another quick thing to know about this, tax laws can change at any time, and this 13,610,000 can quickly reduce and affect way more people. So it's just important to be mindful of that, maybe stay up to date on lifetime exclusions just to confirm that you won't be affected by it for both the gift tax and the estate tax. Okay, so we're going to cover a couple of estate planning documents that are that you need to include in your plan that essentially it's not going to govern the distribution of your assets, but it's going to govern the care that you would receive and also provide some more instructions to your overall estate plan. Okay, so a side letter of instruction, this is not a legal document. What this is it's an owner's manual to your estate plan. So this is where you put your personal information, final wishes, financial information and overview. You list all of your financial professionals in this packet. Also, maybe even care of your pets if you were to pass away, and then personal messages to loved ones. This is the document that you can add more color to why you're making distributions to loved ones. Specifically why someone received X and why another person received Y. This is your opportunity to have that conversation with your surviving beneficiaries. This document, if you have a big stack of estate planning documents, you have your last will and testament, all these other documents, beneficiary designation records, all this, you're going to want to put this on top. This is the first document that your executor or your trustee should take a look at when managing your estate. Okay, financial power of attorney. This is typically, if you go see an estate planning attorney, you're going to get your last will and testament, your will, or your revocable living trust drafted. They're also going to be taking a look at a financial power of attorney. And this is managing your finances while you're living. If you were to become incapacitated, if if you got hurt and you were unable to manage your own finances, this financial power of attorney, this legal document will list a person to step in on your behalf in order to continue to manage your financial accounts and your assets. This is very important to have just in case anything were to happen. The last thing that your loved ones want to worry about is the management of your assets. I can tell you from firsthand that it is a pain in order to work with the financial institutions or the banks in order to provide access for someone to manage your investments or other assets without having this financial power of attorney. You want to make sure that you're looking into this as well. They also have some power of attorneys you want to make sure that it's durable. So essentially what that means is if you establish a financial power of attorney and you became incapacitated, that person would continue to be able to manage your assets, your financial accounts. If you didn't have a durable financial power of attorney, they're not going to be able to continue to manage your assets if you become incapacitated. Another thing to consider is springing power of attorney. It essentially lists a specific event at which somebody can take over your financial accounts and managing them. You want to reach out to an estate planning attorney to learn more about that. But if you were to become incapacitated, that could be an example for an event for when you would want somebody else to step in, spring into action, and manage your investment and financial assets. Now, one quick thing, financial power of attorneys do not continue when you pass away. That's when your executor or your trustee then steps in, takes the baton, and continues to manage the assets. Last thing I want to cover is Georgia Advanced Directive for Healthcare. So this is really important. This is a document you can find online. You can fill it out. You can go ahead and do everything that the document requests for you to activate it, but it's so important for you to have. The reason being is if you were to get hurt, if you were to become unable to talk or make decisions on your behalf and you were in the hospital or a medical facility and needed care, this document allows you to designate somebody to act in your best interest. Another thing that it does is it provides instructions on end-of-life care. So at what point in time do you not want to receive end-of-life care, or how do you want end-of-life care administered? It's really important if you're ever in a car accident and you're in the hospital, and it's good to have additional instructions on file so you can add your wishes on exactly what you want to happen in that scenario. Last thing is, if you become incapacitated and the court or our legal process decides that you need a guardian in order to help take care of you, this document also allows you to nominate somebody to be your guardian in that scenario, and they'll factor that in. Okay, so we went through many strategies of growing your assets, also different ways to protect your assets, and lastly, some estate planning topics to help you efficiently and effectively transition your assets to your loved ones. This is all really, really important. A lot of topics that we covered today. My goal was for each and every one of you to go home with some things that you could work on, or at least reinforce what you knew about personal finance. But ultimately, we went through a lot of information that's helpful to be able to help you make those financial decisions more easily and think through it. All right. Are there any questions from anybody in the audience?
Hey, quick question on the Roth distribution that is tax-free. Is that just the initial amount that you invest, or the interest on the Roth as well?
It's actually both. So the way a Roth works is the money that you put into it that's tax-free at that point. It's not sheltering income from taxes, but the money that you put in is in the account. And then any growth on the Roth assets are also going to be tax-free. So then when you go to pull money from the Roth account, you don't have to pay taxes on that either. So it's extremely powerful, very strategic during if you're in retirement, to have access to a Roth account, so you can, maybe you have an unexpected expense that comes up in retirement, and the amount of taxes that you pay typically goes up. If you wanted to try and redirect your distributions from your accounts in order to stop paying taxes at that level, you can start pulling from your Roth account. So it's good to have a little bit of both there as well.
Okay, well, I have a few questions.
Yes.
The first question I have is, with a 403B, is there a time when you don't have to pay taxes on your 403B when taking your money out?
Yes, that's a great question. So for all of these accounts, you can contribute, for the most part, you can contribute the Roth side of the account or the pre-tax side of the account. So it's ultimately how you decide to contribute to it. So you can, if you have a 403B, you can contribute to it via the pre-tax side, and then you'll be able to shelter some of your income. But just know that you will have to pay taxes when you distribute it at a later date. Did that answer your question? That one?
I think
so. Okay.
And then on the estate plan, if you want your assets to be equally divided between your children, do you need to have an estate plan?
So I would say yes. An estate plan. So when I went over the estate plan, I kind of threw all the things at you that you would need. So each of those things is an estate planning puzzle piece. So your beneficiary designations, if you have a 403B and you've designated beneficiaries on those accounts, then you already have an estate plan in place. Now, with that being said, I have worked with people that don't have assets that they don't have assets that would go through probate, that would need a last will and testament to provide instructions on where those assets should go to, because they have a trust or they have a beneficiary designations on all their financial accounts. I would say you still have personal property, and that still needs instruction for where it will go if you were to pass away. So it's one of those things where even when people tell me that, oh, I don't need a last will and testament, I just think like you may not, but it's better to have that document in place to be the catch-all or the bedrock of your estate plan. So with that being said, yeah, there's different puzzle pieces. So it's whatever you find is best for your situation to make sure everything has instructions on it when it distributes to your loved ones. If you're accomplishing that, then that's perfect.
Okay, and the last question I had was about the Georgia Advanced Directive for Health.
Yes.
So when my children turned 18 and went to college, I did one of these so I could still have medical rights to them. How long does those last?
So this will also tie into HIPAA. Essentially what happens in that situation. Remember, your health directives, that only kicks in when you become incapacitated and unable to make decisions on your behalf. So with that being said, unless you update them, they're going to stay in place until that person has updated it. Now also realize your health directive is only as good as you've spread the information out. So you need to provide your healthcare providers, you need to have a note in your wallet if you were to get into a car accident, hey, I have a health directive, you need to contact my agent in order to gather more information before you administer health, life-saving, healthcare, all of that. So you need to spread it out as much as possible, because if the health care providers don't have access to that document, they're going to assume that you don't have one. I think that answered your question. I will say HIPAA, which may be a portion of your question, anytime you go to a doctor's office, they're going to have you fill out a HIPAA form, which designates another person to receive health information. You want to make sure that your kids are filling those out as they go to their doctor's appointment. That's something that's easily forgotten, and I'm really glad that you're thinking about it.
Yeah, when I saw that when they turned 18 and went to college, I was like, well, I'm not going to have any rights when they go to the hospital or something. And because my son got a concussion at 18 and they weren't going to let me do anything, but I had this document, so I was able to go in and be able to do this.
And I'm so glad that you shared that, because I think a lot of us, we may not have experienced that, but goes to show having that document in place, even when you're 18, is so important. It's going to, you hope you never have to use the document, but if you do, you're going to be so thankful that you had it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Where would you indicate who has access to your digital media, those kinds of things?
So the best way to do this is to go into each of all of your online accounts. They have a way for you to manage who would take over your accounts if you were to pass away or unable to manage the accounts. I will say, I believe for powers of attorney, you can draft up a document that states that you can log into the online accounts and manage social medias from there. However, it's up to the social media or whatever online account's legal team on whether they will process that. It's not 100% guaranteed. But it's also good to be aware of that if that's a concern for you. Talk to an estate planning attorney, see what they can do to help ensure that you have that flexibility.